Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel. In this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And when talking about the situation on the ground, we haven't received lots of updates from this area, and mainly because of the fact that most of the Russian military experts and military telegram channels were focused not on the situation on the ground in Ukraine, but they were focused on the situation in Dagestan, the southern region of Russian Federation. This is Dagestan. This area, this small republic inside of Russian Federation, has border with Azerbaijan, Georgia and Caspian Sea. And the thing is that yesterday there was a very heavy strikes and very heavy clashes between civilians, Dagestani civilians and Russian police forces. For example, on this video you can see how the Dagestani people tried to break the Russian police car, and they damaged this car. As you can see, there are a lot of people. So the thing is that this region is a Muslim region. This region is not just a Muslim. This is like, let's call it old-fashioned Muslim region, Orthodox Muslim region, and people from this area completely support Palestine. And we know that currently there is a very heavy clashes in Gaza. Some people are saying that, of course, Israel has right to defend themselves. Some people are saying that this is the genocide of Palestinians. Anyway, the thing is that the Ukrainian pro-Ukrainian sources started spreading the information that an airplane with Israeli people was flying from Gaza, from Israel, not from Israel to Dagestan, and that airplane with Israeli arrived in Kaspiysk International Airport. And the Telegram channels, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Western Telegram channels, started spreading the information that these Israeli people arrived in Dagestan to capture the lands of Dagestani, of the local people, to capture their lands and to capture their homes. Of course, it sounds not smart, very smart, but it's not like something that I created in my mind and something like this. We got a lot of posts from the local Telegram channel saying exactly like this. And there were posts where the Western sources and pro-Ukrainian sources, or the channels who controlled by the pro-Ukrainian special forces, ask people to go on strike and to start fight against the local authorities. Furthermore, and later, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, confirmed the situation and in Dagestan, saying that the Russians are doing very bad things, not just with Dagestani civilians and people. Also, the Russians, he tried to put in the same line like Russia, Dagestan, and let's say Iran and Gaza and Hamas in the same line, in his posts, trying to get probably more attention from the Western countries, from the United States of America, or maybe Israeli. So that was the strikes and the situation in Dagestan that took place during the previous night. Obviously, the Russians will answer this question to the Ukraine for this destabilization. So the only thing we would like to know the method that the Russians are planning to use. Now let's move on the situation on the ground. During the previous night, the Russians made, during this morning to be more precise, the Russians attacked Odessa with Onyx missiles. I'll remind you that during the previous 48 hours, according to the Minister of Defense report, the Ukrainians made a very powerful attack with the drones against Crimea. 36 drones the Ukrainians were using. So basically the Ukrainians tested and stressed the Russian air defense, and probably this morning the Ukrainians plan to make more attacks, but the Russians prevented the Ukrainian attempts to attack by counterattacks with Onyx missiles. When talking about Kherson, if you remember, the Russians have replaced the general in this area, the commander of this tactical group Dnieper. Currently, the Russians are trying to regroup to understand the things, what is going on, and of course, the new commander, his main purpose and his main goal, his main first task is going to clear the Russian bank of the river from the Ukrainian forces. And I'll remind you that Ukrainians still have the foothold in the village by the name of Krynki, in the village by the name of Pidstepne, on the north of Pidstepne, and of course along the railways between Pridniprovsk and Pishanovka. The Russians during the previous night tried to attack the Ukrainian forces in this area. On this video we can see the bridge between Pridniprovsk and Pishanovka, and as a result of FPV drone bombardments, some Ukrainian soldiers were killed or wounded, or even were or killed or wounded, or something like this. Now we're moving further to Zaporizhzhia area. During the previous night, the Russians published few geolocations, and most of the Russian sources confirmed that as a result of clashes that took place on the western part of Robotina, the Ukrainians managed to capture another tree line on the west of the village and basically to improve their positions a little bit. We remember the videos, we remember the price that Ukrainians were forced to pay for that attack, but at least for now they have a secured western flank of the village. Furthermore, the Russian sources published very interesting video how they were bombing and attacking the tree line on the west of Robotina with multi-launch rocket systems. And this very important, very interesting video, and the value of this video is that before the Ukrainians launched their attack with Leopards, this tree line was under Russian control. So let's say that 5 days ago, this tree line was under Russian control. Currently, I'm not saying that this tree line was captured by the Ukrainians, but as I understand, the Russians are trying to keep a distance with the Ukrainians, and the Russians took a decision to step back and to move to the next tree line. This is like the Russian tactics. So currently, the Russians have their positions along this tree line, and they're planning to meet the Ukrainians if they're planning to continue any offensive operation further. Obviously, the Ukrainians will move further because there is no barrier, basically just the counter-artillery strikes and FPV drone strikes, but the Ukrainians are not counting their losses. So we're gonna see more clashes in this area, and the Ukrainians will continue movements in direction of between Kopany and Novoprokopovka. Very interesting updates are coming from Avdiivka area. We haven't received any geolocations or videos. We just received a lot of text messages from the soldiers and the officers on the ground, and they are very interesting. For example, when talking about the northern direction, the Russian sources are saying that the Russians continue their offensive operation, trying to develop their positions in this area, and some Russian sources are saying that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter and develop their offensive operation further in direction of Keramik Novokalinovo. So according to that update, there is a very high chances that the Russians managed to improve their positions on this flank, something like this. So we need more geolocations to confirm this, but for now we need to keep this in our minds. Furthermore, the sources are saying that the Russians continue their offensive operation, let's say on the south of Terikon and on the south of Severne. The Russians, according to the, let's say, Syriac map, managed to establish control over another tree line, so another disinterception of trees. But other Russian sources are saying that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over the first buildings in the village by the name of Severne. So this is Severne. I have put this icon softly, but according to information we just received, the Russians, as a result of clashes during the previous days, managed probably to enter the village and to dig in deeper, at least for a little bit. And currently there are clashes for the village, and this is a very critical situation for the Ukrainians, because if the Ukrainians lose Severne, this is going to be another step, another very powerful step for encirclement and creation of the cauldron of Avdiivka. Furthermore, some other Russian sources are saying that the Russians currently are focused on these, let's say, dacha residential areas that located on the eastern side of Avdiivka, northeastern to be more precise. So currently there are also very heavy clashes for this area, and the Russians basically try to get inside of Avdiivka from this direction. So this is another area of clashes, and we understand the situation because the Russians control Terikon, the Russians control fire positions, and currently there are no problems for the Russians. Of course there are always problems, but there are not so big problems as there used to be in this area. Now they can storm this area with armored vehicles, with tanks. And maybe upcoming week, this week is going to be clashes for this part of Avdiivka and for villages like Severne and Tonenka. So let's wait, and we're gonna get more updates. The Ukrainians from their side try to prevent the negative media, media waves, media situation for them, and they published significant number of videos of scenes of FPV drone strikes against the Russian armored vehicles on this direction. On Avdiivka area, as you can see, there are a lot of armored vehicles that were abandoned, lots of infantry the Russians were using, and the Ukrainians during the previous days, since the 10th of October, tried to damage the Russians as much as possible. But no matter the losses, no matter the videos the Ukrainians published, anyway, we see that the Russians are advancing, the Russians develop, and they're getting more and more, and they're getting closer and closer to create the Avdiivka cauldron. Very interesting updates are coming from Krasnogorovka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed the Russian offensive operation, how they managed to bypass this territory and capture these 3 lines, and the Ukrainians this morning published the video of the same battle but from their side. On the Russian video we saw how the Russians managed to capture the territory, and they managed to do this, but the Ukrainians published at least some videos how they would try to stop the Russians with FPV drone strikes. As you can see on the video, they damaged a single tank probably with 4 or 5 FPV drones, but they couldn't stop the tank. And just when the infantry landed, on this video we can see how the Russians landed the infantry, abandoned the armored vehicle, and then the FPV drone gets inside the vehicle and destroy it from inside. So the clashes on this direction continues, but the initiative is on the Russian side, and the Russians continue developing their foothold on the north of Marinka, on the south of Krasnogorovka. And as we discussed, the main purpose of the Russians, the main goal is to capture the territory between the lakes on the north of Marinka and on the south of Krasnogorovka. If the Russians can do this, this situation may change the entire fight for this bridgehead completely. When talking about Artyomov's Bakhmut front line, as you can see, I have updated the map along the railways in the vicinity of Avdiivka, and most of the mappers have already done this as well. The Russians probably were forced to step back further deep inside of the Russian controlled territory because it was very difficult to control the situation along the railways, and probably because of absence of long-term defense positions. Currently the Ukrainians have their positions along this area, but the Ukrainians are under very heavy fire under the Russian FPV drones, so they have significant losses, and there are very low chances that they will be able to save the control over this territory. Anyway, sooner or later they will be forced to step back. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman front lines, we haven't received almost anything during the previous night, just the FPV drone strike against the Russian infantry somewhere in the vicinity of Kalimychiha, which confirms the Russian progress in the Russian area that is under Russian control. So we're just using this FPV drone strike to clarify the combat line on the area between Stelmakhovka, Mesazharivka, Kalimychiha. There were no clashes, just a regular, let's say, drone attack. Furthermore, today, as we know, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, Shoigu, arrived in China. He has a meeting with the top authorities of China, and he had press. He was interviewed. There has press conference, and during that event, he reported that since the beginning of Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation, they lost more than 90,000 soldiers, 1,600 armored vehicles, and around 600 tanks. So the losses were very heavy, and the question whether the Russians are able to use these benefits, use this situation to improve their own positions along the combat line in Ukraine. So we'll see. Anyway, Shoigu arrived in China not to show his face. Probably he arrived there to sign some contracts and documents, and probably these documents and contracts are going to be very important and very, very interesting. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.